Okay, so let's get started with web development. I have found the onto the book. Yeah. Hmm. What's up, HTML5? We've been using HTML5 elements in the past several chapters, but there is a lot more to HTML5 specification. The new markup possibility, although that is an important part. HTML5 is actually a bundle of new methods for accomplishing tasks that previously required special programming or property plugin technology, such as Flash or Silverlight. It offers a standardized open source way to put audio, video, and interactive elements on the page, as well as the ability to store data locally, work offline, take advantage of local information, and more. Nice. With HTML5 for common tasks, developers can rely on built-in browser capabilities and not need to reinvent the wheel for every application. HTML5 offers so many promising possibilities, in fact, that it has become something of a buzzword with connotations far beyond the spec itself. I just need to check the mic is working and everything else. Okay, great. Uh, when marketers and journalists use the term HTML5, they are sometimes referring to CSS3 techniques or any new web technology that it isn't Flash. In this chapter, you'll learn what is actually included in the spec, and you can join the rest of us in being slightly irked when the HTML5 label is applied incorrectly. The important thing, however, is that the mainstream awareness of web standards is certainly a win and makes our job easier when communicating with clients. Of course, with any spec in development, browser support is uneven at best. There are some features that can be used right away and some that aren't quite ready for prime time. But this time around, instead of waiting for the entire spec to be done, browsers are implementing one feature at a time and developers are encouraged to begin using them. Driving the sidebar. I should also mention that the HTML5 spec is evolving rapidly and parts in the frame. Yeah. I should also mention that the HTML5 spec is evolving rapidly and parts are likely to have changed by the time you are reading this. I'll do my best to give you a good overview and you can decide which features to research and follow on your own. Much of what's new in HTML5 requires advanced web development skills, so it is unlikely you'll use them right away, if ever. But as always, I think it is beneficial to everyone to have a basic familiarity with what can be done. And basic familiarity is what I'm aiming at with this chapter. For more in-depth discussion of HTML5, I recommend. Okay. Tracking browser support. There are several nice resources out there to help you with HTML5 which are reduce malicious overseas recovery sector. I feel like it's only fair to warn you that this chapter is the cod liver oil of this book. Not pleasant to get down, but good for you. An understanding of the big picture and the context of why we do things the way we do is something any budding web designer should have. A funny thing happened on the way to XHTML2. Understanding where we've been provides useful context for where we are going. So let's kick this off with a quick history lesson. We'll start at the very beginning. The story of HTML from Tim Berners-Lee's initial draft in 1991 to the HTML5 standard in development today is both fascinating and tumultuous. What does tumultuous mean? Let's see, I can just go. Making an uproar confused. Okay. Excited, confused, or disorderly. Mm, can't I? Yeah, okay, better. Early versions of HTML. HTML Plus in 1994 and HTML 2.0 in 1995, built on Tim's early work with the intent of making it a viable publishing option. But when the World Wide Web, as it was adorably called back in the day, took the world by storm, browser developers, most notably Mosaic, Netscape, and later Microsoft Internet Explorer, didn't wait for any Jenkins standards. They gave the people what they wanted by creating a slew of browser-specific elements for improving the look of pages on their respective browsers. This divisive one-upping is what has come to be known as the browser wars. As a result, it became common in the late 1990s to create two separate versions of a site that targeted each of the two big browsers. In 1996, the newly formed W3C put a stake in the ground and released its first recommendation, HTML 3.2. It is a snapshot of all HTML elements in common use at the time and includes many presentational extensions to HTML that were the result of the Netscape Internet Explorer feud, the lack of a style sheet alternative. HTML4 1998 and HTML4 is a slide version aimed to get HTML back on track by emphasizing the separation of structure and presentation and improving accessibility. All matters of presentation were handed over to the newly minted cascading style sheet standards that was gaining support. Okay. Enter XHTML. Around the same time that HTML 4.01 was in development, folks at W3C became aware that one limited markup language wasn't going to cut it for describing all sorts of information: chemical notation, mathematical equations, multimedia presentation, valuation information, so that might be shared over the web. Their solution: XML, Extensible Markup Language, a meta language for creating markup languages. XML was a simplification of STML, Standardized Generalized Markup Language. The big common of meta languages that Tim Berners-Lee used to create a original HTML application. HTML proved to be more complex than the web required. The W3C The W3C had a vision of an XML-based web with many specialized markup languages working together, even within a single document. Of course, to pull that off, everyone would have to mark up documents very carefully, strictly abiding by XML syntax to rule out potential confusion. Okay, the first step was to rewrite HTML according to the rules of XML, so that it could play well with others. The result is XHTML extensible. The first version XHTML is nearly identical to sharing the same elements and attributes, but with stricter requirements for how markup must be done. Okay, XHTML markup. Element and attributes name must be lowercase. HTML elements are case sensitive. All elements must be closed. Empty elements are closed by adding a slash before the closing bracket. Attribute value must be in quotation marks. Single or double quotation marks are acceptable as long as they are consistently. Okay. Furthermore, there should be no extra white space or line returns before or after the attribute value inside the quotation marks. All attributes must have explicit attribute values, and therefore XHTML does not support attribute minimization. And there's certain activities can be reduced just activity time. So while in HTML you can write checked to indicate that a form button be checked. In XHTML you have to explicitly write out. Okay. Proper nesting of elements is strictly enforced. Special characters must always be represented by character entities. Use ID instead of name as an identifier. Scripts must be contained in a C data section. So they will be treated as simple text editors and not style XML. Okay, here's an example. HTML forward along with XHTML. Stricter XML based serving became the cornerstone of the web standards movement. The Web Standards Project in 1998 at height of browser wars, grassroots coalition called the Web Standards Project began to put pressure on browser creators, primarily Netscape and Microsoft, to start sticking to open standards as documented by W3C. Not stopping there, they educated the web developer community on the many benefits of developing with standards. The efforts revolutionized the way sites are created and supported. Now browsers, even Microsoft, brag of standard support while continuing to innovate. You can read them. Okay. They're still the most thoroughly and consistently supported. But the W3C didn't stop there. With a vision for XML-based web in mind, they began to work on XHTML 2.0, an even bolder attempt to make things work right than HTML had been. The problem was that it was not backwards compatible with old standards and browser behavior. The writing and approval process dragged on for years, no browser implementation. Without browser implementation, XHTML 2.0 was stuck. Okay, hello HTML5. Meanwhile, in 2004, members of Apple, Mozilla, Opera formed the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group. Separate from W3C, the goal of was to further the development of HTML to meet new demands in a way that was consistent with real world authoring practices and browser behavior, in contrast to the start from scratch ideal that HTML 2.0 was. The initial document, Web Application 1.0, Web Form 1.0 were rolled together into HTML5, which is still in development under the guidance of an editor. The W3C eventually established its own HTML5 working group based on the work done by WC. As of this writing, work on the HTML5 specification is happening in both organizations in tandem. What is tandem? Having two things arranged in front of another. Sometimes conflicting results. It is not yet a formal recommendation as of this writing, but that isn't stopping browsers from implementing it a little at a time. Okay. Note: the maintains what is called HTML Living Standard, meaning they aren't giving it a version number. It is nearly identical to HTML5, but it includes a few extra elements and attributes that the W3C isn't quite ready to adopt, and it has a slightly different lineup of APIs. The XHTML 2.0 at the end of 2000 officially put it out of its misery, pulling the plug on the working group and putting its resources and efforts into HTML5. So that's how we got here, and it's a whole lot of prelude to the meat of the startup, which of course is the new features that HTML5 offers. I also encourage you to read the sidebar HTML5 Fun Facts for more juicy information on the specification itself. In this section, I'll introduce what's new in HTML5, including doc type, elements, attributes, obsolete, and APIs. Okay. HTML5 Fun Facts. HTML5 both builds on previous versions of HTML and introduces some significant departures. Here are some interesting tidbits about the HTML5 specification itself. HTML5 is based on HTML 4.01 strict, the version of HTML that did not include any presentation based or other deprecated elements and attributes. That means the vast majority of HTML5 is made up of the same elements we've been using for years and browsers know what to do with them. HTML5 does not use DTD, document type definition, which is a document that defines all of the elements and attributes in a markup language. It is the way you document a language in HTML, and if you'll remember, HTML was originally crafted according to the rules of HTML. HTML 4.01 was defined by 3 separate DTDs: transitional, including legacy elements that were marked as deprecated or soon to be obsolete; strict, deprecated features stripped out and noted early; and frame set, for documents broken into individually scrolling frames, a technique that is now considered obsolete. HTML5, it is recording, right? Okay, great. HTML5 is the first HTML specification. HTML5 is the first HTML specification that includes detailed instructions for how browsers should handle malformed and legacy markup. Nice. It bases the instruction on legacy browser behavior, but for once there is a standard protocol for browser makers to follow when browsers encounter incorrect or non-standard markup. HTML5 can also be written according to the stricter syntax of XML, called the XML serialization of HTML5. Some developers have come to prefer the tidiness of well-formed HTML, lowercase element names, coded attribute values, clothing all and so on. So that way of writing is still an option, although not required. In edge cases, an HTML document may be required to be served as XML in order to work with other XML applications, in which case it can use the XML syntax and be ready to go. In addition to markup, HTML5 defines a number of APIs, application interface. APIs make it easier to communicate with web-based applications. They also move some common processes such as order into native browser functionality. In the markup department, we'll start with a look at the markup aspects of HTML5 and then we'll move on to the APIs, a minimal doc type. As we saw in chapter 4, HTML document should begin with a document type declaration, doc type, that identifies which version of HTML the document follows. The HTML declaration is short and sweet. Compare that to a declaration for the strict HTML. Why so complicated? In HTML 4.01 and XHTML 1.01, the declaration the declaration must point to the public DTD, a document that defines all of the elements in a markup language as well as the rules for using them. HTML 4.01 is defined by 3 separate DTDs: transitional, including legacy such as font, attributes such as align that were marked as deprecated and obsolete; strict, deprecated features stripped out; frame set, for document broken into individually scrolling frames, a technique that is now considered obsolete. HTML5 does not have a DTD, which is why we have the simple doc type declaration. Okay. TTDs are a remnant of HTML and proved to be less helpful on the web than originally thought. So the authors of HTML5 simply didn't use it. Validators, the software that check all the markup in a document is correct. So, use a doc type declaration to make sure the document abides by the rules of specification it claims to follow. To check whether HTML is valid, use yes. There's also validator into Dreamweaver. Okay, HTML doc types. The following list all doc type declaration in common use. HTML5. Okay. Elements and attributes. HTML5 introduced a number of new elements. You'll find them sprinkled throughout this book, but table 10.1 lists them all in one place. Okay, article, site, audio, PDI, canvas, video, track, time, summary. New form input types. We've covered the new form input controls, check 9, but here they are at a glance. Color, date, time label, email, month, number, range, search, time. New global attributes. Global attributes are attributes that can be applied to an element. The number of global attributes was expanded in HTML5 and many of them are brand new. The W3C is still adding and removing attributes as of this writing, so it's worth checking in the spec access key. Single text character assigns an access key shortcut key command to the link. Access keys are also used for form fields. User may access the area one of the standardized state or property keywords and area accessible to internet application defines a way to make web content and applications more accessible to users with assisted devices. Okay, HTML5 allows for any of the area properties rows to be added to element. For example, a div used for a pop-up menu could include the attribute area hash pop-up to make that property clear to a user without visual browser. Okay. Then we have class testing, assign one or more classification names to the element. Then we have content editable, true false. Indicates the user can edit the element. This attribute is already well supported. Oh, nice. Context menu. ID of the menu element. Specify the context menu that applies to element. This context menu must be requested by user, for example, by a right click. Oh, context menu. Nice. Texture numerical enables others to create custom data related attributes. That is a symbol meaning anything. Nice. Data. So the data can be used by custom application or scripts. That's great. There specifies the direction of element left to right, right to left, draggable. Nice. Move by clicking and holding onto it, then moving to a new position in the window. Drop zone indicates the element can accept dragged and dropped text file or nice. Copy, link, move. The values are space separated list that includes what type of data is for plain text, file types, and a keyword that indicates what to do with Top content. Copy results in a copy of the tracked data. Move link results in hidden no values. Prevents the element and its sentence from being rendered in the user agent. Nice. Lang, 2-letter. Specifies the language of the element used. One of the standard role keywords in the array assigns one of the standardized WARA roles to the element to make its role. Okay, this is also these are attributes, right? Nice. Div with contents. Okay, spell check, true, false. Nice. This is style, semicolon separated list of style property value pairs. Nice. Okay. Oh, nice. So you can give the attributes. Nice. That's great. Tab index number specifies the position of the current element in tabbing order in the current document. The value must be between 0 and 32767. It is used for tabbing through links on a page or a field in form. It is useful for assistive browser devices. A value milestone is allowable to remove elements from the tabbing flow and make them focusable only by JavaScript. Title? Yeah, okay. Obsolete HTML 4.01 markup. HTML5 also declared a number of HTML elements in HTML 4.01 to be obsolete because they are presentational, antiquated, and poorly supported. If you use them, browser will support them, but I strongly recommend leaving them in the dust. Okay, font, try. Are you still with me? I know, this stub gets pretty dry. That's why I've included figure. It has nothing to do with HTML5, but I thought we can okay, meet the APIs. HTML5 application prior to HTML5 included only documentation of elements, attributes and value permitted in the language. That's fine for simple text document. But the creators of HTML5 had their minds set on making it easier to create web-based applications that require scripting and programming. For that reason, HTML5 also defines a number of new APIs for making it easier to communicate with an API, application programming interface, is a documented set of commands, data names and so on that lets one software application communicate with another. For example, the developers of Twitter documented the names of each data type, users, tweets, timestamps and so on, and the method of accessing them in an API document. That lets other developers include Twitter feeds and elements in their programs. That is why there are so many Twitter programs and widgets available. Amazon.com also helps with its product data via an API. In fact, publishers of all ilks are recognizing the power of having their content available via an API. You could also say that APIs are hot right now. But let's bring it back to HTML5, which includes APIs for tasks that traditionally required proprietary plugins like Flash or custom programming. The idea is that if browsers offer those features natively with standardized sets of hooks for accessing them, developers can do all sorts of nifty things and count on it working in all browsers, just as we count on the ability to embed an image on a page today. Of course, we have a way to go before there is ubiquitous support for these cutting edge features, but we're getting it there steadily. Some APIs have a markup component such as embedding multimedia with new HTML5 video and audio elements. Others happen entirely behind the scenes with JavaScript or server-side components, such as creating web applications that work even when there is no internet connection. Oh. The W3C The W3C and WhatWG are working on lots and lots of APIs for use with web applications, all in varying stages of completion and implementation. Most have their own specifications separate from HTML5 spec itself, but they are generally included under the wide HTML5 umbrella that covers web-based applications. HTML5 includes specifications for these APIs. Media Play API. For controlling audio and video players embedded on a web page, use the new video and audio elements. Okay. Session History API exposes the browser's history for better control over the back button. Okay. Offline Web Application API. Make it possible for a web application to work even when there is no internet connection. It does it by including a manifest document that lists all of the files and resources that should be downloaded into the browser's cache in order for the application to work. When a connection is available, it checks to see whether or not the documents have changed and updates those documents. Editing API. Provides a set of commands that could be used to create in-browser text editors, allowing users to insert and delete text, format text as bold, italic, or as hypertext link, and more. In addition, there is new content editable attribute that allows any content to be editable right on the page. Okay. Drag and drop API adds the ability to drag a text selection or file to a target area on the page or another web page. Adds the ability to drag a text selection or file to a target area on the page. The draggable attributes indicates the element can be selected and dragged. The drop-down attributes used on the target area that defines what type of content it can accept and what it can do when it gets there. The following are just a handful of the APIs in development at W3C with specifications of their own. Canvas API. The canvas element adds a dynamic two-dimensional drawing space to your page. Oh, nice. Web storage API allows data to be stored in the browser's cache so that an application can use it later. Traditionally, that has been done with cookies, but the web storage API allows for more data to be stored. It also controls whether data is limited to one session, when the window is open, closed, or domain. Oh, that is great. Geolocation API. Lets users share their geographical location so that it is accessible to scripts in a web application. That allows the app to provide location-aware features such as suggesting a nearby restaurant or users in your area. Okay. Web Workers API. Web Workers API provides a way to run computationally complicated scripts provides a way to run computationally complicated scripts in the background. This allows the browsers to keep the web page interface quick and responsive to user actions while working on processor-intensive scripts at the same time. The Web Worker API is part of the HTML5 spec. It's been moved into a separate document. Okay. So WebSockets API creates a socket which is an open connection between the browser, client, and server. This allows information to flow between the clients and the server in real time with no lags for the traditional HTTP request. It is useful for multiplayer games, chat, or data streams that update constantly, such as sports or stock Nice. You can think of WebSocket as an ongoing telephone call between the browser and server compared to the walkie-talkie or real-time style of communication. Browser slash server communication. Hat tip. Some APIs have correlating HTML documents such as audio and video elements for embedding on a page, and the canvas element for adding a dynamic drawing area. In the following section, we'll talk a brief and look at how these elements are put to use. Okay, video and audio. In the earliest days of the World Wide Web, I know I was there, it was possible to add a MIDI file to a web page for a little beep boopy soundtrack. It wasn't long before better options came along, including Real Media and Windows Media, that allowed all sorts of audio and video formats to be embedded in a web page. In the end, Flash became the de facto embedded multimedia player, thanks in part to its use by YouTube and similar video services. What all of these technologies have in common is that they require third-party proprietary plugins to be downloaded and installed in order to play the media file. Until recently, browsers did not have built-in capabilities for handling sound or video, so the plugins filled in the gap. With the development of web as an open standard, it seemed like the time to make multimedia support part of browsers out-of-the-box capabilities. Okay, farewell Flash. Apple's announcement that it would not support Flash on its iOS devices ever gave HTML5 an enormous push forward and eventually led to Adobe stopping development on its mobile Flash products. Not long after, Microsoft announced that it was discontinuing its Silverlight media player in lieu of HTML5 alternatives. As of this writing, HTML5 is a long way from being able to reproduce the vast features and functionalities of Flash, but it's getting there gradually. That means we're likely to see Flash and Silverlight players on desktop for years to come, but the trajectory away from plugins and towards web standards technology seems clear. The good news and the bad news. The good news is that the audio and video elements are well supported in modern browsers, but lest you envision a perfect world where all browsers are supporting audio and video in perfect harmony, I am afraid that it is not that simple. Although they have all lined up on the markup and JavaScript for embedding and controlling media players, unfortunately, 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 they have not agreed. Unfortunately, they have not agreed on which formats to support. Let's take a brief journey through the land of media file formats. If you want to add audio or video to a page, this step is important to understand how media formats work. When you prepare audio, or video content for web delivery, there are two formats decision to make. The first is how the media is encoded. The algorithms used to convert the source into ones and zeros and how they are compressed. The method used for encoding is called the codec, which is short for code, decode, and compress, decompress. Okay. There are bazillion codecs out there, there's an estimate. Some probably sound familiar like MP3, others might sound new like H.264, Wobbis, Theora, VP8, and AC. Fortunately, only a few are appropriate for web, and we'll review them in a moment. Second, you need to choose a container format for media. You can think of it as a zip file that holds the compressed media and its metadata together in a package. Usually, the container format can hold more than one codec types, and the full story is complicated. Because space is limited in this chapter, I'm going to cut to the chase and introduce the most common container codec for the web. To add video on site, I encourage you to familiar. Okay, it's complicated. Okay. If you are going to add video or audio to your site, I encourage you to get more familiar with all these formats, the book and for further reading sidebar. Okay. Meet the video formats. For theory, the most common options are OGG container plus theory codec plus Vorbis audio codec. This is typically called OGG Theora. The file should have a OGV suffix. All of the codecs in the container in the options are open source and unencumbered by patents. What does unencumbered mean? Unencumbered, not having a burden. Okay, free of that financial liability. Unencumbered. Okay, by patents. Royalty restriction, which makes them ideal for web distribution. But some say the quality is inferior to other options. MPEG 4 container plus H.264 video codec plus AAC audio codec. This combination is generally referred to as MPEG 4 and it takes MP4 or M4V file suffix. H.264 is a high quality and flexible video codec, but it is patented and must be licensed for a fee. The royalty requirement has been a deal breaker for browsers that refuse to support it. WebM container, VP8 video codec, and Vorbis audio. WebM is the newest container formats and uses the WebM file extension. It is designed to work with VP8 and Vorbis exclusively and has the advantage of being open source and royalty free. Of course, the problem that I referred to earlier is that browsers make heavy. Browser makers have not agreed on a single format to support. Some go in open source, royalty free like OGG Theora WebM. Others are sticking with better quality H.264 despite the royalty requirements. What that means is that we web developers need to make multiple versions of videos to ensure support across all web browsers. Okay, meet the audio formats. The landscape looks similar. The landscape looks similar for audio formats to choose from, but no format that is supported by all browsers. MP3. The MP3 format is a codec and container in one. With the file extension .mp3, it has become ubiquitous as a music download format. The MP3 short word MPEG-1 audio layer 3 is patented and requires license fees paid by hardware and software companies, not media. The Wave is also codec and container in one. OGG container plus Vorbis audio codec. This is usually referred to as ODD Vorbis and is served with .odg file extension. MPEG 4 container and AAC codec. MPEG 4 audio and 4 is less common than HFA. WebM container and the formats that also contain audio only. Video and audio encoding tools. There are scores of options for editing and encoding video and audio files, so I can't cover them all, but here are tools and free, but the following tools are free and get the job done. Miro Video Converter is a free tool that converts any video to into this Handbrake, Firefog, New converter. Okay. Adding video to a page. I guess it's about time. We go to the markup for adding a video to a web page. This is the HTML part of the book. After all, let's start with the example that Let's start with an example that assumes you are designing for an environment where you know exactly what browsers who your user will be using. When this is the case, you can provide only one video format using the source attribute, the video, just as you do for an image. Show the movie with the default play in the Chrome browser. We'll look look at other attributes for the example. Okay. Image. Okay, source width. Okay, that's how you can add chapter 10. What is the name of the chapter? What's up HTML5? HTML5. I'll go with how did I exercise. Okay, and I get to exercise. Well, that's that. An embedded movie using the video element shown in with pixel measurement specifies the size of the box that the embedded media player takes up on the screen. Generally, it is best to set dimension to exactly match the pixel dimensions of the movie. The movie will resize to match the dimensions set here. Okay. Poster URL of image provides the location of a still image to use in place of the video before it plays. Thumbnail. Controls. Adding the controls attribute prompts the browser to display its built-in media controls. Generally, a pause play button, a seeker that lets you move position in the area, and volume controls. Okay. It is possible to create your own custom player interface using CSS and JavaScript if you want more consistency across browsers. How to do that is beyond the scope of this chapter, but it's explained in sources. Okay. And autoplay. Autoplay makes the video start playing automatically once it has downloaded enough of the media file to play through without stopping. Okay. In general, the use of autoplay should be avoided in favor of letting the user decide when the user should start. Okay. iOS 3 devices will not play a video that includes the post attributes, so avoid using it. Okay. In addition, the video and audio element can use the loop attribute to make the video play again when it is finished. Muted. Who playing the video track? The IDM media group for making the video element part of the group related media elements. Transaction and preload for suggesting to the browser whether the video should be fetched as soon as the page loads. Okay. Setting the preload to metadata loads the information about the media file but not the media file itself. A device can decide how to best handle the auto setting. For example, a device preload audio loop muted. A device can decide how to best handle the auto setting. For example, a browser in a start mode may protect a user's data by not preloading media. Auto video for all. But wait a minute, we already know that one video format isn't going to cut it in real world. At least you need to make two versions of your video, OGG Theora and MPEG 4. Some developers prefer WebM instead of OGG because browser support is nearly as good as the files are smaller. As a fallback for users, with browsers that don't support HTML5 video, you can embed a Flash player on the page or a service like YouTube or Vimeo. In which case, you let them handle the conversion and just go with a okay. In the markup, a series of source elements inside the video element point to each video file. Browsers look down the list until they find one they support and download the source elements. So in the markup, the series of the Flash fallback gets added the traditional object and embed elements. So if a browser can make head or tail video, so chances are highly it can play in Flash. Finally, to ensure accessibility for all, it is highly recommended that you add some simple links. The videos that can be played, whatever. Right. Fail. Without further ado, here's one very thorough code example. Oh. Okay, object and embed. The object element is a generic way to embed media such as movie, even images in a web page. It contains a number of parameter elements that provide instructions or resources that the object needs to display. You can also put fallback content inside the object element that is used if the media is not supported. The attributes and parameters vary by object type and are sometimes specific to third-party plugin. Object's poor cousin embed also embeds media on web pages. It has been a non-standard but widely supported element until it was finally made official in HTML5. Some media require the use of embed, which is often used as a fallback. You can see an example. Okay. Code and video for everybody. I highly recommend checking. Okay. So we have this. I think we will get into the details later.